is Ben Austin with Education Civil Rights Now. As I said, we're going to have a discussion about the theory of change about making quality public schools an actionable civil right for parents in America. And I'll just kind of foundation set, excuse me, to begin the discussion, but I want to hear from Christina and Professor Liebman, and then we'll just open it up for questions. And there's a lot of great perspectives on this Zoom. Um, the sort of uh, the work around making quality public schools an actionable civil right. I mean, like has constitutional lineage back to Brown versus Board of Education. But the kind of modern version of this began when I started getting on Zooms during the pandemic with Christina and with Jim about how could we make quality public schools an actionable civil right. And this was, as everybody remembers, when children didn't go to school for my daughters were LUSD students at the time and didn't go to school for a year and a half. And in during the pandemic, the LUSD sued, our parents in the LUSD sued the LUSD to try to reopen all schools for all kids. And in their legal pleadings, the LUSD literally said the quiet part out loud. They said that because there is no right to quality public education, they have no legal obligation to deliver a quality public education. And parents have no standing to ask them to reopen schools or do anything else. We get what we get and we don't get upset. And that was, at least for me, the kind of foundation for beginning to explore this question about how could we make quality public schools a civil right for children in America, because that right now, children in every state in America, pretty much they have a right to a free education, but for the most part, not a right to a education of any quality whatsoever. How can we change that? There is work being done in multiple states across the country. Christina and Professor Liebman have been involved in most of that work. And the work is oriented around trying to thread a sort of constitutional and political needle to craft language that looks on its face kind of like puppy dogs and rainbows, because it's a statement of universal values. We asked voters in California the question, should students have a right? Should public school students have a right to high quality public schools? And 97% of voters agreed. Our pollster called that polling gold. He like fell out of his chair because in this era um, of polarized politics, you just don't see numbers like that. And Cornerstone did a poll at the end of last year of advocates in our space. And I think it was 86% supported quality public schools as a civil right, as a key action item in democracy reform. And so I'd like to now turn to Christina and Professor Liebman, and get both of your perspectives. It would be great to hear a little bit about how your stories intersect with this work, and how you view this work through the lens, Christina, of you being an advocate and a parent and a grandparent, and Professor Liebman, from your perspective as one of the leading constitutional scholars in the country. Christina, do you want to get, and then we'll turn it out. We'll open it up to questions. Christina, do you want to start?
Yeah, I would love to start. So I was born and raised in San Diego, California. And when I finished high school, I went to go work for San Diego Unified School District. I started having my children, having a family, and I was able to talk to my colleagues anytime I had a problem, right? If my children were having issues in school, I was able to communicate within the system as an employee, and those problems we worked out. It wasn't until I moved out of San Diego and then, continued having younger children. I still have school age children right now. My youngest is 12. That I was no longer able to talk to my colleagues, right? I'm not working in the system. I wasn't able to talk to my colleagues. So if I had an issue, had to go through layers of exhaustion and departments, starting from the teacher on out to the district, just to have anything answered or resolved. It culminated into this very bad treatment towards my now 12-year-old son, who was at the time in kindergarten, where I noticed this school to prison pipeline dynamic. Every single thing that he did was punished. He was excluded. He was just day after day. And by second grade, he had suicidal ideations. And so I had to remove him from that environment. And we did a lot of therapy after that to even get him to understand it wasn't him, it was where he was at, right? They couldn't understand his modality of learning. They couldn't, foster his potential. And that's hard to explain to a 6, 7, 8 year old because that's how many years it took in therapy to get him to understand it wasn't his fault. And then I decided to start looking for another option, right? I felt like I knew enough about education for working 13 years in education that I could search for something better. But where I was at, there wasn't very much left. And so I ended up finding a personalized learning program and homeschooled my son and decided that I was just going to keep him on that track. But what happened during that time was, as I met with other parents, and particularly Black parents, I was hearing similar complaints. And when I was in the system, I didn't recognize, these complaints the same way as me looking at it from the community and parent side. So we took our complaints to the NAACP, and the NAACP at that time was the entity that I advocated out of, and then moved on to national work of advocacy into NAN. And I met Ben and we started talking about what rights do parents actually have, right? We go to the school district and we talk about, well, you're violating our rights, but do we really have rights? And so we started with the coalition of parents, really in depth research and inquiry, discussions with Professor Liebman about what rights do parents actually have and how are those rights, if any, a powerful tool for them to be able to advocate and make decisions on behalf of their children. And out of that, we didn't find very much. And in fact, what we found was ancient, and it didn't offer flexibility and it didn't speak to some of the discriminatory things we were, experiencing as Black parents in the civil rights arena. Obviously understood Brown versus Board of Education, but didn't understand what next, right? So started informing the work of civil rights organizations, and also at the same time looking at ways that as parents we could co-create an actionable right, moving that from a theory into action. And so that's how I got involved with this work, was just being a frustrated parent with among other frustrated parents, trying to do the research to find something that give us a powerful tool, and then saying, you know what, since there isn't one, let's create one. And so we became co-authors of the fundamental right to a quality education, along with Ben and others.
Thank you. That's great, Christina. Professor Liebman?
Yeah, so let me, I guess I'll start my story in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I grew up, and the public schools there, public school system, which I went through, were just an amazing place where kids from all sorts of different walks and cultures and everything came together. And as one of the very few Jewish kids in this, in the city, in the schools, it was just this amazing process of integration that has, influenced my thinking about this ever since. Got on to be a lawyer, and I began my career in school desegregation, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, did the largest inter-district school desegregation case ever in Kansas City, Missouri. But gradually, actually, my work has shifted from litigation to thinking about structure. Anyone who's a lawyer learns in constitutional law, there are two sides of the Constitution. One is about the structure, the way we structure everything to make sure that incentives and learning structures and everything are set up right so we get where we want to in the public interest. And then we have these rights that just in case the majority in running those structures discriminates or in some way takes away somebody's rights, we can sue and get those rights back. And so I spent the beginning of my career doing that kind of suing as a litigator, but gradually came to conclude that a lot of these public institutions, including especially public schools, it's not that they don't want to change or in some senses they're malevolent, but it's just that they have no idea how to change. And that's because they're so ingrained in the structures that they live in that they just don't know what else is possible and how to do it. And so I switched a lot of my work over the years, still do some litigation, but mostly to thinking about how to get inside those institutions and bring about change. And part of that is sometimes you can't get inside if you don't have a litigation motivation or a litigation push. So it's not as if litigation's not useful, but my basic structure and created a center here at the at Columbia to train students who come from all over the country to become public sector transitional, transformational leaders. But gradually, I just want to say something about how I think about the right to education. And it's going to take me a second here just to go all the way back to the framing of the Constitution, believe it or not. But it turns out that the framers, and this was true basically of all of the folks who were instrumental in the Constitution, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Wilson, and others. And then if you go forward to Horace Mann, who's the great educator, first superintendent of a school system for Massachusetts in the country, go to John Dewey. Basically, everybody said, you know, we got this problem in the United States. And the problem is we're very diverse and we have all this liberty and we have all these centrifugal forces. We tell everybody, you know, we're going to give you all this liberty and go do what you want. But somehow in doing that, we have to maintain two things. One is solidarity. How do we hang together without having everybody go and do whatever they want? But if we're giving everybody liberty, what happens if they all want to exercise their liberty to take somebody else's liberty away? Or get a majority and have the majority take somebody's liberty away. And of course, that's the history of our country, that it has done that. And so if you asked all of them, how are you going to solve that problem? The answer was public education. So public education is not just a constitutional right. It is a constitutional structure. It is the structure that our framers understood would be the one that would enable us to preserve democracy by having all of us go to schools together with people who are different from us and learn how not only to respect others, but to problem solve with others in ways that made us able to get things done, even if we disagreed with people, and to understand how we could respect and work with people who are very different from us. And so I tend to think about public schools the way that all 50 constitutions speak about them. It is not a right. The word right and the word education do not appear in United States constitutions talking about schools. They talk about a system, a uniform system of public schools. It is the system of public schools. It is a structure, and that structure has to be there to preserve what our federal constitution requires, recalls our Republican form of government, which we today would call democracy. And if you look at the history of the country, you could not become a state in the United States unless you, A, preserved Republican government in your state, and B, had in your constitution a right to education or a duty to provide education, because that was how the federal government was going to ensure that we were going to have Republican democracy all throughout the nation, was by requiring all of the states to have systems, uniform systems of free public schools. And so the way we designed the statute our constitutional provision that we've proposed in California is as a duty on the part of the state on behalf of the people. The holder of the right is the people, not individuals, but the entire people, to have a right to high quality education, high quality public schools, because those institutions are the ones that are absolutely essential to preserving democracy and Republican governance throughout the states. And so I've been focusing a lot of my thinking and writing about how one can think about what the enforcement of that duty looks like. And what's interesting about it is the way that this sets things up. There actually is enforcement power both at the federal level and at the state level, and in all three branches of government. There's an executive responsibility here, there's a legislative responsibility here, and there's a judicial responsibility here, both at the federal level and the state level. I've said too much, but
no, that's great, Professor. Thank you. It would be great to hear from both of you. Christina wearing your parent advocate hat, and Professor wearing your constitutional scholar hat. About if this right were in a state constitution tomorrow, and just to say out loud, it's not in any constitution today. No child in America has any rights when it comes to the educational quality they receive in public schools. If this right, if this language that's in the chat were enshrined in any state constitution, what would change? Christina, how would things change from the perspective of public school parents, especially parents of color? And Professor, how would things change from your perspective? And I'm especially interested, Professor, in your duty to innovate, and specifically how the making the constitutional unit of accountability at the school level, right to high quality public schools as opposed to high quality public education, what that does in terms of limiting lawsuits, et cetera. Either of you all can go.
Go ahead, Christina.
So for me, I understand that in order to be equipped to fully participate in the economy and democracy and in society, you have to be literate and numerate, right? And the rate that let me just give an example. In California, 67% of Black children can't read or write at grade level, and 80% can't do math. And I see that data consistent all across the nation. And I know that NAEP indicated that Black children have not progressed for over 20 years. So that is a direct hindrance to upward mobility. And so I understand that the minimum baseline standard needs to be that children are taught in a way that they're literate and they're numerate. That's the first thing. I mean, I think it's an assumption that parents have that I'm going to put my child in the school and they're going to be able to be literate and numerate coming out and on level, but that's farthest from the truth, right? It's furthest from the truth. We feel the repercussions of it every single day when we're noting that children are not able to access upward mobility. And when they're graduating from what I call the achievement gap into the racial wealth gap. So the minimum baseline standard has to be something that indicates what type of education our children are going to receive, who's responsible for that. I mean, if my child's at school 6 to 8 hours a day, I don't want them leaving illiterate and numerate.
And Christina, how would things change from the perspective of a parent whose child is in a low quality public school?
So it'll give them a powerful tool to advocate instead of, just being told to go to the school site council meeting and, see what we could do, or being tossed around over and over and over again. Because if this is a minimum baseline standard and it's guaranteed, then that directs them to the accountability people to say, you didn't uphold your end of the bargain. You told me I'm compelled to compulsory attendance, rules and laws, or compulsory education to attend school. I brought my child. Now you need to fulfill your obligation to, give them a quality education.
Right. Thanks, Professor.
Yeah, well, I'm going to start right where Christina, with something she said, which I think is really crucial. Why put my kids in a school that's not going to teach them to be literate and numerate? And it is a crucial aspect of the way our system is set up that public schools perform this really central role. But because we have all this liberty stuff, right, we can't force families to put their kids in public schools. So it is essential to the survival of our public schools as an essential aspect of our democratic government that they be good enough to attract families and parents like Christina to them. And what we're seeing right now is a national uh, 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 just just people leaving in droves from the public schools. And we see state after state now thinking about creating the capacity to let the money leave the public system and follow those kids wherever they take it, including to schools that don't teach democracy, that don't teach that we should respect each other and all of that. And so we're at this very, very critical moment right now where I think the success, the survival of our public education system and therefore our democracy is really at stake. So what we need is an obligation on the part of states to understand that their schools have to serve everybody because they have to be attractive enough so that people want to put their kids in those schools and they can therefore serve their democratic purpose. And so the way that we're thinking about this right in this duty in California is to say, look, you have a duty to educate all kids. And the first part of that duty is look and see, are you educating kids or are there disparities? Two kinds of disparities. State has standards. Christina mentioned, you got to be proficient, right? Except 80% of the kids aren't proficient. So that means there's this gigantic disparity between what you're supposed to do and what you are doing. Second disparity, is there a disparity between categories of kids, between Black and white kids, between kids who are on free lunch program or not, and all of those disparities. And if they are disparities, then you have an obligation to figure out what you can do about those disparities. Now, does this mean that poof, we've got to say now everybody tomorrow, they're all going to be 100% proficient, they're all going to be geniuses or whatever? Of course, no court wants to do that and no system would be able to do that. So how do we measure this? Well, the answer is we look at, first of all, we understand that the school is the unit of change because it is the structure. It is the structure that is specified in all of these constitutions, schools, public schools. So that's where the kids are. And then the question becomes, how do we know whether a school is doing its duty, especially if 80% of them aren't? And the answer is we look at schools across the state, maybe across the country, and we ask ourselves, are they, do they have these disparities that are greater than other schools like them? There happens to be a tool at Georgetown University that lets you compare your school to every other school in the country in terms of things that we care about, how much money they have, what kinds of kids they have, and all of that, and what outcomes are they getting at those schools. And so you can pick any school in the country and you can push a button and you have hundreds of other schools just like it. And what you see is there's a huge disparity in how well they're educating kids. It is not the case. Obviously, there are trends and patterns that kids with more kids, schools with more kids who have less resources or are Black or whatever, there are definitely trends that suggest that they're not getting the education that others are. But there are plenty of schools across the country, just like yours, where all of the kids are getting much better outcomes, fewer disparities between standards and between kids than elsewhere. And so the way we think about this constitutional right is what's possible. You need to do at least what's possible and have a duty to try to do better than that. And we're going to try to create a race to the top. As each school gets better, that means that of the other schools just like it need to keep up with it. And so that's how we're thinking about what the right is. How do we enforce it? You can enforce it in court. But my view is the first thing we should do when this right gets, this duty gets adopted is go to school systems and say, look, here are 10 of your schools or 50 of your schools, whatever it is, and they're failing, and we can show you they're failing by comparing them to other schools just like them elsewhere. You ought to get with the program here and fix it, and then we need to provide the services and supports that enable them to do that, hoping that many of them will do it, and the ones that don't, then you'll have to sue them.
And Professor, can you speak for a second about how making the unit of constitutional accountability at the school level communicates to a court that this isn't an individual right for individual problems, more of like a
Yeah.
systems
So
change, right?
what has tormented the courts consistently is this view, if we think of education as a right for every individual child, then what are we going to do to bring all individual children up to some level, which nobody knows what it is, and the courts don't want to be the ones to have to say that because they know they'll just fail. And so what the notion of this is a duty, and it applies across the board, but the unit of change or action is the school, is to say, look and see if the school is failing. Yes, you're going to have a curve of where students are. You're going to have that everywhere. But we can compare a curve at this school to the curve at the other school and see that your curve is in the wrong place and it has much more diversity to it. And so that's something that a court can think about doing something about, and understanding that the public duty to provide a school that Christine wants her kids to go to, that public right is being violated, because whatever else you can say about this kid on one end of the spectrum and this kid on the other, the major part of those kids are falling below proficiency or below where they are at a school elsewhere in the state that has similar kids but is doing much better. They can
Great.
understand that as a violation of the duty.
Thank you, Professor. And last question for both of you, and then we'll open this up. As you all know, the Cornerstone project is about connecting education and democracy. And as you also know, because both of you helped craft this language, the word democracy is literally in the right in California and in the language that other states are replicating. How do you all think about and I think you all have both touched upon this in your remarks already, but like, how do you think about how establishing quality public schools as an actionable civil right for all children in America is foundational for the project of saving American democracy?
Go ahead,
Either of you
Christina.
can jump in.
So I feel like I'm a little bit biased about this because I wish I can give all children a civic education, right? I mean, I'm talking from kindergarten all the way through, instead of there being just civics in 11th grade or 10th grade or, one semester. And I feel like that would prepare them not only to be participating in democracy, but be leading the way. Being in situations where they see themselves as representatives of their community or their state or school boards, and having practiced that until they mastered it all the way till they graduate. So I feel like that's one way. And then when you do that, you also can bridge some generational gaps or lack of understanding of having a fully informed populace. Because as you educate children around civic education, civic engagement, then the parents are right alongside receiving that education and getting that understanding. What are these processes and governance structures? How do I engage? How do I, make fully informed decisions? And then how do I advocate for rights or either amendments, right? Different things that come along with that. And so I think that takes more than just one semester. But I see that enshrined in education and democracy.
Thanks, Christina. Professor?
Yeah, I just, taking off right where Christina was. Our schools are really interesting democracy wise, because it's where you learn to be, you learn about democracy, but it's also the most important place where most people interact with the government. Much broader than anything else, maybe the post office, but whatever else, every day. And it's something that matters to them deeply, right? So the schools are about democracy inside the classroom, and they're about democracy in the interactions with schools and all of the parents there. And so when I was reading, I read all of Horace Mann this past summer, which I don't recommend because he's a terrible writer. But he had this amazing idea of education in the 1830s. And his basic point was, look, we can't get, people can't get along. At the time, it was the Baptists versus the Methodists, but nobody can get along. And how are we going to fix that? And he said, well, the public schools are going to fix that in two ways, because there's two ways that we have conflict. One way is we disagree on the facts. We think the world is different, and so we fuss over that. He says, well, let's stop fussing and let's get kids together to learn how to identify what the facts are together. They're going to get together and they're going to model the process of resolving conflict about facts by learning how to figure out what the facts are. And then we have this other thing called moral disagreement, which is different, but you also have to learn how to pursue issues, understanding that you have moral disagreement, but finding ways to be able to reach agreement, solve problems, do things together, despite the fact that you have moral disagreement. That's teaching democracy. That's exactly what our country simply doesn't have right now. People who disagree can't have no way to do anything together to solve their factual and moral disagreements. And if we don't have ways to get kids to model that while they're in school, we're going to be in really bad shape, because that's the savior, as all of these people have thought. And then you've got the parents who are also part of democracy, school board meetings, whatever it is. And that's the other way in which we model democracy. And so between those two, we need to, that's how we're going to fix democracy. And they come together when it turns out that the best way to fix schools is to let families and kids who know most about what the school is doing, what the effects are, if we can bring them into the process of problem solving about how to fix those schools. This means a little bit different from school board meetings. It means a different kind of democracy that's a truly participatory kind of democracy, where families are part of this. This is what Landon and Cornerstone does, but that, I think, is just as important as what's happening inside the classroom, is what's happening surrounding the classroom, bringing in the community to be part of, leading the change that needs to happen there.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Christina. This has been a really rich discussion. Want to now open it up for questions. You can either raise your hand or just jump in.
I'd love to jump in. First off, I just would love to say thank you, Christina and Jim, for your passion and your intellect and your courage. Christina, hearing your story about how you took your battles against the system and converted it into a legal argument to unlock that power for potentially millions of parents is just, man, that's just tremendously exciting. And Jim, the legal architecture that you speak of is just, oh man, it really gets me excited about where this all can go. And thank you, Ben, for bringing the folks to the space. One of the things that I became really interested in this quality right to constitutional education when I was in college, and I stumbled on FDR's Second Bill of Rights that he articulated kind of at the end of his kind of like right before he passed away, actually, in his fourth term. And it's an incredible list. And included in there is the right to a good education. And there's a great video, and it's a funny story about the video. It was presumed lost for a long time, and now they actually, in 2008, someone found the video of him giving the speech. Anyway, it's a really beautiful piece. And if you look at the list, healthcare, an affordable home, a good education, a job. And these are affirmative declarations of a world in which I think so many of the battle lines are drawn in our current society. And yet I see very few people in our society picking up the kind of duty to innovate, rights-based affirmative constitutional structure argument that both of you are articulating. Instead, we play kind of around the edges in the policy world. And I just would love to maybe get your reaction to why bold, big thinking like what you're articulating and what FDR has in the Second Bill of Rights, why that's gone astray, and how could we get that back into our civil discourse?
Professor, I see you smiling.
Let me try. Part of the problem is that this country has this individualism streak. It's part of that liberty stuff that I mentioned, that we get to believe whatever it is we want and all of that, which of course we value those rights, but the idea is, and this creates a great mistrust of government. And because of that, there's a resistance to anything that qualifies as an affirmative right or an affirmative obligation on government's part. Why I think public education is so important, and why our framers and the great philosophers of American democracy have, is because there is one exception to that. Every one of our constitutions obliges the state affirmatively to create these public school systems. And the idea is that through the public schools, we will be able to both prepare people to succeed in the economy, so that that will help us with things like jobs and distribution of wealth and other things like that. And it will also give us a commitment to equality, because we will have everybody together interacting with each other. And this is what I look back on my education in Albuquerque, New Mexico at Mark Twain Elementary School. And that's what it was. There were kids from all over different socioeconomic, and we just, hung together. And so I think that we need to break down the resistance to government. But the way to do that, I think, is through the schools. And partly that's because if there's one institution that the public has respected in the United States over centuries, it has been their public schools. And if we lose that respect, then we're really in trouble. So it's not a great answer unless, the answer is move to Denmark or something. But I do think that where the country has made progress in recognizing other people and their needs so that they can exercise liberty. There's nothing about this that's against liberty. It's about preparing everybody and giving everybody the wherewithal to exercise liberty. But I just think that the schools are the place where we can make the most headway.
And I also think in the wake of the Dobbs decision, there's a new recognition that we have to actually write rights specifically into our civil rights framework, because if we don't, we got to rely on courts to squint and recognize them, and that's not working out so well. Sandy.
Thanks, and thanks for this great conversation. I'm just like, my wheels are spinning. So one thing I wanted to pick up on your last point, Professor, this idea is so powerful, and yet we are talking about it in an environment, to your last point, where I don't think public education has ever been under kind of more threat, right? Like the privatization, the voucherization, the starving of public education across the country is not accidental, it's intentional, right? And so how do we move forward on this on this really important issue? And I love being positive and proactive about it. And maybe actually we need all of your materials, Professor, and Christina and Ben, you too, like to actually remind people of how this really does harken back to our history, which we seem to have forgotten. But it strikes me that this is a particularly interesting time to be having this discussion because the threat is so great.
Yeah, I agree with that. By the way, although Ben insists, I actually have a first name and I like to go by it too, just like everybody else. And it's not Professor. So, but anyway, that is the question, Sandy. I mean, it's the question for our country's survival. It's not just the question for the school survival. And it worries me every day, just like I can tell it worries you.
Yeah.
And it's not as if I have a lot of great answers to it, but I actually want to go back to the democracy point. It's really what all of you have brought you together around the Cornerstone project, which is supposing we could create around our public schools a set of activities that attract families and teachers and members of the community who care to improve the schools. And imagine that we had a structure through which we could have those conversations be productive, which is no easy thing, as Landon could tell us, but it is something that's possible, as Landon also can tell us. And if we could do that, then we have better schools, because we're bringing in the people who know what the schools, either what's not working for them as the consumers of public education, like Christina, or what's happening inside the schools for why it's working, the teachers and everybody else. So we have that information, and then we have better schools emerging from that, which people will respect more because they were part of the process of making them better. So it's their schools, it's their improvement, it's their. And so, a lot of this, it seems to me, is to build from the ground up and do that. And so when I think about the constitutional provision we're creating in California, what I think of it is as triggering, as creating a structure through, or an environment through which all of that work can take place. And so that's my best guess. If we can get people working together about something they care deeply about their kids, and just to say, let's put everything else aside. Would we like the bathrooms in our school to be cleaner? Would we like our kids to be learning more math? Whatever it is, can we all work together to do that and put aside all the stuff we disagree with? And that's a new democracy. And from that democracy, I think a lot can emerge.
And I think maybe we have to start by making the case for public education, back to your original story, right? About when it works and what it does for democracy and the connection to democracy. And I feel like we have, even those of us in the education space, like even those of us who have worked to reform it or make it better, we sometimes skipped like those first couple of steps, which is like, we are in this fight because this is really critical to our democracy, right? It's really important that we do this and we get it right. We are about protecting and improving public education, not about undermining it. And I think that we have to somehow distinguish our criticism from those people who criticize public education because they seek to undermine it. And it's very murky now, but this is making me think about maybe different ways to communicate the case, right? We need to do a better job of like making the case about what's possible, including this co-creation you speak of.
Yeah, and I totally agree. That's what we spend our time with our students doing, which is really to say, we're all cooked. We're all in terrible straits if our institutions don't work. Whatever else you think about global warming or economy or whatever else it is, if we don't have institutions, we're not going to fix them. But it's also true that our institutions don't work very well. So the question is, but they have worked well in the past, and they're designed to work well. And we have a duty for them to work well in this area, if not others. So let's get together and make them work better and solve those problems, and believe that we can, make democracy do that. And so that's kind of the order of business that I think of. But you're right. I think a lot of it is convincing people that schools aren't just another thing, that we can sort of redo the rights, just like we're redoing everything else. Schools are like really fundamental.
So Christina, you were at the table, and Professor Liebman, both of you have been at this table, this drafting table, for over 3 years, and it is effectively taken 3 years to write one sentence. And that sounds insane, but there was some method to the madness. Can you give your perspective on that process, and what we may have learned from that could be applicable to this work going forward? Christina, you want to start?
Right. And so the first year, though, we spent doing the inquiry and research and learning with parents. And we then co-crafted various versions of what we wanted as this educational, or the fundamental right to a quality education. And then we took that back and met with, legal experts. Professor Liebman, I'm sorry, Jim was a part of that, that group. And then we even, had the conversation with some of, I remember talking to some of your law students, Professor Lehman, and asking like, what are your thoughts about this? And so we spent a lot of time considering what this would mean if we got this as a constitutional amendment, like states' constitutional amendments to say, we're not just offering a system of common or public schools, we're offering high quality public schools, right? And that was it. Like, how can we just get that one sentence into state's constitution? So we're setting a standard that people understand, and that was a little bit more challenging than we initially thought, because then you have the question around, what does quality mean? And we're saying we can definitely tell you what quality is not. And so let's just move from there, right? Like, don't go there, let's go here. And so we did that. And then we started really evaluating like what would be the course of action in all these different states, whether it be by ballot initiative or talking to the legislatures, or trying to figure out, is this a local level thing that can happen to spark that change? And so I will say that as far as from the parents' perspective, we spent a lot of time co-developing this language, then vetting this language, or seeing how it operated in the field after talking to experts, and really coming up with this one sentence that doesn't seem like it took forever, but it really did. And so, yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions about that. But I really want to say, like, one of the favorite lines of wisdom that I hold on to from Thurgood Marshall was that he stated that he did not believe that the meaning of our national constitution was fixed from the start, right? And I think that getting people to understand that this document that we have, or constitutions that you have in states, are not meant to be fixed, but actually living documents. Like, we, the people in this era, can say, hey, we need to, ebb and flow and do this and do that, is very challenging. It's very challenging. So while I respect Thurgood Marshall's wisdom, I wish he would have left a playbook of how do we get there. That would help me in my advocacy.
Thanks, Christina. Professor
Mhm.
or Jim?
Yeah, so I think we started out about 1,200 words. Was that something like that? And we got it down to 30 or less. And I think part of that was recognizing that we, just need to establish, it's really what you said, Sandy, we need to establish a principle that everybody can get on board for. The second thing that I think was really important was, for me at least, structuring as a duty around schools. And I think this also helps with the issue that you raised, Sandy, which is we're trying to create this norm, this very normative rich statement that can motivate people across the state, everybody who votes for it, every school, every legislator, and everything else. And for me, the idea that we have this duty to provide all of our kids and the people of the state of California with high quality public schools, as a structure, a fundamental structure of government. If you actually look at the state constitutions, they believe that there are four fundamental branches of government. There's the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, and these systems of public schools. And so to get everybody to understand that it is fundamentally important to having a functioning government, to have this system of high quality public schools, seems like it's doing a lot of the work that we want to do. It's creating the legal obligation that you want to create, but it's also creating the expectation on the part of the people from their government and the people in the government as to what it is they're supposed to do, and getting it all down to 30 words. And I guess I would try to characterize what we did, although that sounds like we had more method than madness, but there was a little bit of each.
Yeah. We probably have time for one last question. And I also just want to flag that I put my email in the chat for anyone that has follow-up or wants to get involved. Maya, it looks like Maya put a question in the chat. Maya, do you want to read it, or do you want me to read it?
I think
Can you
she's having
unmute?
trouble with her audio. So
Oh, you're having trouble with your audio. Okay.
Right.
Oh,
So I did read the question,
Okay, Christina,
and
go.
I'll read it out loud. So how do
Yeah.
you all think local engagement from parents and students at schools and school boards plays or should play into building quality educational systems, especially as attacks on public schools from hate groups like Moms for Liberty continues to grow while our schools are structurally set up to struggle in Georgia? We don't provide any funding for students living in poverty in our education funding formula, yet just passed a voucher that could divert as much as 1% of the total state education allotment to private schools. It wouldn't, if you wouldn't mind reading it, that would be great. Okay, got it. So, um,
Yeah, oh, go, Chris. Do you want to? I
yeah,
can.
I want to touch on that. So I understand what you're saying, right? What does that local engagement look like? And I think that instead of it being this or that, it can be all of the above. And I say that as a public school board member and a parent, right? Like I am currently a public school board member in the state of California, and I found myself having to wear multiple hats just to be able to advocate for children to have a quality environment, right? I don't believe that this would take away from that advocacy. I believe that it would set the stage for forward advocacy as the North Star. We're advocating for high quality education, and it's not the wrong thing to ask for, right? It's the right thing to ask for. And so, from whatever vantage point that parents have powerful tools to do that, whether it be them becoming school board members, and I'm definitely willing to train up on that, or them advocating as parents to a school board or to the state legislator through ballot initiative or whatever that may be. I think all of the above are necessary.
I just want to say a quick point on the Moms for Liberty piece because it's important. And I just say this as a progressive, that there is a lot of activity on the right around parent power. It does. I think we should not cede that territory only to Republican white parents, and that parents of color should have a seat at the table to advocate for the interests of their children as well. And the advocacy of Moms for Liberty, I mean, is harder, not easier, when there's a civil right to high quality public schools, because right now they can sue over whatever they want. But if they want to go into court and make the case that banning Maya Angelou is somehow prepares children to participate fully in our multi-ethnic society, they can do that. They'll just look like clowns. And so I think this is a progressive answer to Moms for Liberty that's really important and timely. Professor, I don't know if you have a quick.
Let me take 45 seconds because I
Yeah.
know we only have a minute. So, I again turn to Landon for this. I think we need a new politics in our schools. And school board meetings are not it. Everybody stands up at a mic and screams at each other. There's no dialogue, there's no deliberation, there's nothing. And then everybody goes home mad or happy because they got to scream. But I do believe that that democracy at that level is where we can really make a difference. And that just means we need to have a different way of doing it. And parents want to solve problems at their schools. They may want to scream about this or that or the other, but I'm telling you, the Moms for Liberty and any other moms, they want to fix their school and the specific things in their school that aren't going right. And they can often agree on what those things are. And it's not this history curriculum or that, it's other things. And so if we can find ways, and we at CPERL have found ways, and I know Landon has found ways where you can get the Moms for Liberty, and you can get parents with all sorts of other different views, and you can get them together and through an appropriate structure and the right problem to work on to solve the problem, and then to respect each other in a way that they haven't before. So I think, we don't want to dismiss those folks. They have strong views. They're going to bring them forward. I think we have to figure out ways that we can, work with them. But that takes some real doing. And I think it's the work that Landon and Cornerstone are doing and operations like that are going to really solve this problem if we're going to solve it.
All right. I want to thank you so much, Professor. Thank you, Christina. I want to respect everybody's time and end on time. This has been a really rich discussion, and I'm grateful to be on this journey with both of you and with everybody on this Zoom. So thank you all for joining. More soon from Cornerstone.
Have a great day.
Another session in May. We'll be on the lookout. See
Yeah.
y'all. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Take care. Have a great day.